Good evening, good morning, good night, perhaps. Welcome again to Master Craftsman Philosophy, the Master Craftsman Study Group, as we dig into morals and dogma. Glad to have you here again joining us. Hopefully, the audio on this recording is pretty decent. Uh, it's a warm May day here in Missouri. I got the windows open and there's a slight rain going on, so hopefully that's not droning too much through uh, the call today. Brethren, we are about to dive into our next section. This section addresses the 13th to 14th degrees. So that's Royal Arch of Solomon and Perfect Elu. We're excited to dive into those two, these degrees of perfection. We hope you've completed the reading. Remember, especially if you're in the Valley St. Louis group, you need to complete the reading before listening to these lectures. These lectures are meant to be a guide to important text and for your own review and contemplation, not the be all end all. So please keep that in mind, and we look forward to utilizing these as a great resource. So with that, let's switch over to the slide deck and dig into the 13th degree Royal Arch of Solomon. All right, we are back for section 5 as we dig into the 14th and 15th quizzes, specifically this slide deck addressing the 13th degree Royal Arch of Solomon. So we're excited to kind of kick this off and get digging in to these 2 degrees, and specifically the 13th degree for this afternoon, evening, or morning. So let's talk a little bit about the 13th degree. The 13th degree, from an allegorical standpoint, tags us up with 3 master architects, Adoniram, Yehu Aber, and Satolkin, who are tasked by Solomon to clear some rubble near the temple and create a space that later there can be some other construction. The ritual, at least in various forms, tells us it's for a palace for King Solomon, rooms and apartments for him. Inevitably, as they're clearing the rubble, they find a series of passages or vaults that descend into the ground, revealing a vault made by Enoch. The space that they were clearing, unbeknownst to them, was an ancient temple. They descend through these 9 levels, these 9 vaults, and what they find at the bottom is quite impressive. It is a pillar of alabaster that glows. Upon it is a cubical stone with a plate of gold inlaid, and upon that is the ineffable name of God, among other things. Obviously, the 3 master architects realize this is of importance. They leave with the stone, return it to Solomon, who rewards them with this degree, honoring their efforts. Now, of course, the background to this degree and its resulting interactions, of course, remind us that a brother should seek knowledge. He should be motivated by duty and honor, just like those 3 were, not for any real gain of themselves. Quite an interesting degree, really a neat sequence of events. And we're told very early on in the lectures that whether the legend and history of this degree are historically true, or but allegory containing in itself a deeper truth and a profounder meaning, we're not going to debate. The lecture specifically says that, we're not going to sparse hairs here and split things. We're going to look at it because as a degree, we know it has a value, it has duties, it has lessons. The historical veracity of it, the historicity, is not something for our further delving. And he talks, a little bit more about this idea that there's some significance in the background. Specifically, he talks about the idea of the word, the tetragrammaton, and he mentions its relevance in saying that it is certain that there was a word which the Hebrews are not permitted to pronounce, and it was in common use by Abraham, Lot, Isaac, Jacob, Laban, Rebekah, and even some other foreign tribes of the Hebrews for the times of Moses. And that it recurs hundreds of times in various texts across the board. And that is kind of a key thing here, because this is going to be very much about this idea of the lost word. So this lost word revolves around the idea of the ineffable name of God. And we know that for many centuries, of course, the Hebrews had this word. It was forbidden to be pronounced, and it was a sacred name. Generally, when it was in text, it was replaced by things like Adonai, which means Lord. So while you may see Yud He Vav He in the text, it was Adonai, our Lord. A lot of translations of the Bible in the Old Testament where you see Lord, it was probably actually the Tetragrammaton, originally there, and just over practice and things shifted by their own efforts. Of course, the true pronunciation of the word was deemed to confer on that person an extraordinary and supernatural powers over time. As we mentioned in Pike Notes, it was a well-known, well-pronounced word very early on. Over time, it lost that commonality. It became much more revered and took on a greater power. And the word itself, said to be worn upon a person, was regarded as an amulet, protection against personal danger, sickness, or evil spirits. It is noticeable, of course, in this notion of the sanctity of the divine name or the creative word, and the fact that it was common among all nations within reason. This idea that there's a word and it has a sacred, great, important relevance. Pike talks here about the sacred word home was supposed to be used by the ancient Persians, who were among the earliest immigrants from northern India. They're tying it to the Aryans, which we'll talk about in the 32nd degree. And it was pregnant with mystery and power. They taught by its utterance the world was created. In India, it was forbidden to pronounce the word Om, or Om, the sacred name of the one deity, manifested as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Now, this concept, of course, leaves a lot to consider, leaves a lot to understand. From our own perspectives, of course, it's true that before the Mesoeric, I can't even talk today, brethren, and you're listening to a recording of this. Before the points were invented, which now rest over Hebrew language, which was just after the beginning of the Christian era, Pike himself notes, the Hebrew language could not be known from the characters it was written in a way. There were no vowels. So it was therefore possible that the name of deity could be forgotten or lost if the general pronunciation was set aside. And it is certain that the true pronunciation is not represented by the word Jehovah. Therefore, the true name of the deity is lost, and it is probably not that word in a sense, and nor is it the ineffable word. The name of God, which of course comes into the connotations of the ineffable word, this idea, even the concept of the lost word, Pike takes some time to discover as he addresses symbolism in the name of God itself. And he talks about the fact that the ancient symbols and allegories always had more than one interpretation. We know that from our ritual. We know that from our other lessons and things like that. There's always another meaning, always another possibility. And those, in a majority, Pike notes here, they always had a double meaning, sometimes more than two, sometimes one serves to envelope the other. And thus, these layers hide deeper connotations. And Pike here notes that the attempts of the ancient Israelites and the initiates to ascertain the true name of deity and its pronunciation, and the loss of the true word, are an allegory in which is represented the general ignorance of the true nature and attributes of God, the proneness of the people of Judah and Israel to worship other deities. This idea that the lost word, the lost pronunciation, is representative of an allegory, our own ignorance of the divine, our own distance from the divine presence and understanding it. And by comprehending it, by knowing it, by finding it, we get closer to the divine. Hebrew monotheism is something that Pike kind of addresses after that. This is an interesting topic, especially if you're interested in biblical scholarship. You'll find some very interesting connotations to that, and the idea that Hebrew monotheism perhaps doesn't really exist in the sense that we would perhaps define it. But Pike goes right to this point, and he talks about the fact that the mass of the Hebrews did not believe in the existence of only one God until a period much later in their history. He speaks specifically of several various portions of the scripture, referencing Amos here. He says, "Ye have borne," Amos said, the prophet said to them, speaking of their 40 years journeying in the desert under Moses, "the tabernacle of your Moloch and Cain, your idols, the star of your gods, which ye made to yourselves." Pike here makes an insinuation that this is a reference to astral worship, or connection to the stars and worshiping in the sky. Very much, religion was quite a different bear in the early period of Judaism, the early facets of the time. There's quite a lot of proof within Old Testament texts of this, of the fact that there were, at least by the Israelites, by the Jewish faith, there were other gods. They were equal to Adonai or Jehovah, or however you want to say that. And over time, through various changes, they became lesser and became more things like demons and such. But Pike here notes this idea that each country had its own idea of a deity, perhaps. They all have belief. They all respected that idea and that concept there. And of course, he emphasizes that, talking in particular about the deity of the early Hebrews, talked to Adam and Eve in the garden. He conversed with Cain. He sat down with Abraham in a tent. The patriarch, of course, requiring a visible token. These gods of old in this time period were tangible beings to these people. They were hard and fast. They weren't just distance, and they were connected intimately to the people. Masonry, of course, inculcates and includes in its communication the conversion and the conversation of esoteric knowledge. Pike talks about this idea of knowledge and secrets, some of which are perhaps lost and constituted under other names, which he says we now may call Masonry or Free or Frank Masonry. The knowledge, in one sense, this idea of the lost word, was made known to the grand elect, perfect and sublime Masons. It would be folly to pretend that any of the other forms of Masonry were the same in those ages as they are now. Even Blue Masonry cannot trace its authentic history back with its present degrees further than the year 1700, if so far. But by whatever name it was known in this or other countries, Masonry existed as it now exists, the same in its spirit and in its heart, not only when Solomon built the temple, but centuries before, even before the first colonies immigrated from southern India, Persia, and Egypt from the cradles of the human race. So Pike here is talking about the roots of Masonry and the idea that there is profound secret knowledge, that it has been transmitted over time, perhaps under the pall of Freemasonry, but not necessarily under that name, and its connections and its relationships. And he talks about some other things here in relation to divine beings and the creator and things that relate to that. Of course, he also emphasizes this idea of these symbols in their various phases of understanding and representing different aspects of the divine in relation to us, the universe in relation to us. And he begins with talking about Solomon's temple, and then he talks about the lodge. And as he talks about Solomon's temple, he talks about the Temple of Solomon is presented often to us as a symbolic image of the universe. And it resembled in its arrangements and furniture all the temples of the ancient nations of practice and mysteries. Of course, the system of numbers utilized in its arrangement and things connected, of course, with their religion and in ways that's come down to us through Masonry. Him he in particular draws attention to the fact that the Holy of Holies was said to have formed a perfect cube, and he gives some discussion upon that. I think that's an interesting thing he notes there, not only for its symbolic value. The cube obviously is a representation of the universe. It can be seen as a representation of perfection, but technically, in the Lodge of Perfection, the lodge room utilized by the lodge when it meets in general business, which would be the 14th degree, is also said to be a cube. Now, of course, carrying forward his ideas of symbolism with the Solomon's Temple and the universe, he clearly tells us, of course, so our everyday Masonic Lodge represents the universe. And of course, keeping these things in measure, we're further told that Philo of Alexandria maintained that the universe was an archetype of the temple. For there are two temples of God, he said, and I believe one is the universe. The whole universe must be regarded in the highest and in the truth, the holy temple of God. Now, within that same sense, Pike talks about various aspects of the degree and those who are involved in the degree and regard it related to it. Key to that, of course, is that luminous pedestal, if you will. This pedestal that upon which the cube of agate that has the lost word on it is found. And this luminous pedestal is lighted from within, and we're told it is a perpetual flame. It's a symbol of the light of reason given by God to man, in which we are enabled to read the great book of nature. The most important record of the thought, revelation, and attributes of the deity. Of course, our first those three master architects, some of the first master architects, Adoniram, Joabert, Tolkien, represent to us in their descent the true Masons who seek for knowledge and pure motive, that they may be better enabled to serve their fellows. And what we do hear about in the lecture, but isn't specifically referenced, we haven't talked about yet, is the fact that after Tolkien, Joabert, and Yehu Aber, or who here is referenced as Adoniram, after they make their descent in the vault, they bring up the cubical stone. They're rewarded. We talked about that. But what happens is other workmen become jealous because they see these men being honored. They see these men being lauded and given rewards. And so they decide to go explore this space that these other three had been working at. And these misguided Masons find the stone that hid the vault. They go down into the vault, and the only thing that's left in that vault at that point is that pillar of alabaster that's lit from within. Now, these guys think there's gold or something very important inside that pillar, and they break it. Inevitably, they are consumed by fire. The whole vault system collapses on itself, and they're gone. Dead. So here, Pike, talking about the importance of the three who did well and were pure motive, he talks about those presumptuous and discontented masters who were buried in the ruins of the arches. And they represent those who strive to acquire things through unholy purposes, to gain power over their fellows, to gratify their pride, their vanity, and their ambition. Now, the initial vault built in the earth was made by Enoch. And Enoch didn't actually build the vault itself. He built the chambers that lead to it. The vault itself, the final vault, that ninth space, was built already of unhewn rock, if you will. So there's a great discussion when you compare the vault of Enoch, the vault of Solomon. One was built by human hands and was hewn, and one was unhewn, so prepared by the divine creator or nature, however you want to see it. But Enoch, we are told, of course, he walked with God for 300 years after reaching the age of 65. And when he walked with God, he was no more, for God had taken him. His name, we're told, signifies in Hebrew initiate or initiator. So I think there's some interesting things there. Now, De Hoyos in his notes actually references that Enoch probably means something more like taught or initiated one. So it's close. close in the ballpark, but not entirely there. Um, we already kind of discussed Solomon's temple. Um, Pike hits on a couple other things that are a little more broad, as he does um, in discussing the importance of various aspects of the work. Specifically, he talks about this idea of preserving liberty, and he tells us that it's not enough for people to gain their own liberty; they must secure it. They cannot entrust its keeping uh, or hold it at the pleasure of one man. The people must be in charge. And he tells us that the keystone of the royal arch of the great temple of liberty is the fundamental law, charter, or constitution, the expression of the fixed habits of thought of the people, embodied in a written instrument, or the result of the slow uh, accessions and the consolidation of centuries, the same in wars and peace, that cannot be hastily changed nor violated with impunity, but sacred, like the Ark Covenant of God, which none could touch and live. A permanent constitution, rooted in affections, expressing the will and judgment, built upon the instincts and settled habits of thought of the people, with an independent judiciary, an executive legislative two branches, an executive responsible for the people, and the right by trial by jury will guarantee the liberties of the people. So Pike takes a couple paragraphs here to talk about this fact that the liberty of the people can't just be taken and gained. It has to be secured. It has to be locked down, and it's in the people's trust. And how is that done? It's done by a fundamental law, whether that is a charter or constitution. And he talks about the importance of it and having it in place. Now, of course, he then carries that forward, talking more about society and the importance of a society and working and living in that society and ensuring that the people are educated. And he references here a couple things. He talks about books. He talks a little bit about uh, this idea of toiling. And among the things he specifically addresses, this idea that books, to be of a religious tendency in the Masonic sense, need not be books of sermons or pious exercises and prayers. Whatever inculcates pure, noble, patriotic sentiments or touches in the heart with beauty and virtue and the excellence of an upright life accords with the religion of Masonry and is the gospel of literature and art. Pike here points at this fact that yes, we need to toil and work and we need to live, but we also need to be working to better our minds and things like that. And here he talks about this idea that books of a positive tendency need to uplift our lives, be pure, noble in their sentiments and things like that. And he concludes these thoughts, uh, probably because the tone of this book, or at least the tone of this lecture when he wrote it, a lot of people, one of your big sources of information, especially if you're not overly well read, is going to be from the pulpit. It's going to be from your church. But he ends it with the sentence, "The oracles of God do not speak from the pulpit alone." Now, of course, continuing some ideas of connection to religion, Pike tells us that every Masonic lodge is a temple to religion, and its teachings are instructions in religion. For here are inculcated disinterestedness, affection, toleration, devotedness, patriotism, truth, generous empathy for those who suffer and mourn, pity for the fallen, mercy for the erring, relief for those in want, faith, hope, and charity. Here we meet as brethren to learn and know how to love each other. Here we greet each other gladly. This is the true religion to the ancient that was revealed to the ancient patriarchs, which Masonry has taught for centuries, and which it will continue to teach as long as it endures. If unworthy passions or selfishness, bitter, revengeful contempt, dislike, hatred, etc., enter here, they are intruders and not welcome. Pike heavily emphasizes this idea of what Masonry is as a religion, and he's not saying it's a religion in this direct sense of what we would think of as a religion. He's more referencing it in this idea of religion as is discussed, at least in one place in the Bible, where it talks about taking care of the sick and helping the orphan and helping those in need. And here he's bringing that point back, this idea that we need to help um, and provide. be there, support, do good works. Um, and he ends that thought talking about the fact that a Mason's great business with life is to read the book of its teachings, to find that life is not the doing of drudgeries, but the hearing of the oracles and taking that knowledge forward. His considerations in this degree give us some great things to think about. Particularly, the allegory of this degree, I think, is extremely important from a symbolic standpoint. But he also encourages us to look in the text and consider some of the anthropomorphic characteristics of God described in the Hebrew Bible. Of course, we hear talking about the lost word. We're talking about its connotations. Um, there's some very important significance to all that that's worth doing it. He also talks about this idea of, we just hit on, about every Masonic lodge being a temple of religion. Consider how you feel about that statement. Take some time to look at the footnotes. I think there's some really good points made there regarding this. What do you feel the characteristics are expressed by the divine name and title of Baal, Yud He Vahe, and Mulak? Those are touched on in the text. We talk about other deities, other divine beings. What does it mean to you? We also talk in this degree just briefly about labor being worship, to work, to pray. How does that affect your sentiments in Masonry? And then consider that cubical stone on the pedestal. We have an image of it in the text. Take some time, reflect on it, what it means to you, in the general sense of Masonry. I think there's a profound meaning to that symbol, to the whole structure of the vaults, from a personal aspect. It's on page 278. Give it some thought. Give it some thought. And last but not least, summarize the great law of retribution. It's toward the back of the chapter. I think you'll find some interesting commentary there and some things to think about. Definitely some things to think about. So with that, we're almost ready to move on to the second degree in this segment. That's the 14th degree. So hopefully you've read that, and you'll be able to catch us next time as we do it. Brethren, again, thank you for joining us for the Master Craftsman Philosophy section as we dig deeper in. Thank you for being a part of our discussion on the Royal Arch of Solomon. We look forward to you joining us on the next go-around as we dig deeper and we complete the Lodge of Perfection. Catch you next time.